If you're listening, my friend, let me tell you what happened to me 5 years ago in August of 2019 when I was 71 years old. Something I never thought would happen to me. Me, Clarence Clay Jefferson. Just a simple farmer from Oakland Parish, Louisiana. My own son, Marcus, the oldest one, the one I raised with these calloused hands, he threw me out of my house and tossed me into the old chicken coop like I was trash. Yes, just like I told you. The coop, where we used to keep the chickens. I just stood there, frozen, watching two hired hands he brought haul my belongings out of the room where my wife Alara and I slept for 30 years. May God rest her soul. It was a Saturday afternoon. The heat was brutal, the kind that makes you sweat through your clothes. I was sitting on the front porch, sipping my strong cup of coffee, just like every afternoon, when I saw Marcus's truck pull up. He had two big guys with him, tough looking, with faces that said they weren't interested in making friends. My son didn't even look me in the eye when he got out. He went straight to my room and told those men to take everything out. Everything, you understand? My old leather satchel that my father gave me when I got married, the one with my initials stamped on it. The pictures of my Alara, the ones she loved so much, showing us on our wedding day at the First AME Zion Church downtown. The antique transistor radio we bought together in 1985, the one that still works if you smack the right side. My clothes, my shoes, even my mother's rosary that hung on the bedpost. I jumped out of my chair so fast that my coffee mug slipped and shattered on the concrete porch. I yelled at Marcus, asking what in the world he thought he was doing. But he looked at me with those cold eyes, like I was a stranger, and told me to shut up. He said the house was his now, everything was his, and that I should be grateful he was letting me stay on the property at all. My legs nearly buckled when I heard that. It felt like a knife had been plunged into my chest and was being slowly, painfully twisted. The two hired hands carried my things to the chicken coop, about 50 yards behind the main house. That's the place where we used to keep 20 chickens, where my Alara would go every morning to gather fresh eggs for breakfast. We hadn't kept chickens there for 2 years, not since my son said they weren't profitable, and we should just buy eggs from the market. The coop was about 10 feet by 13 feet. It had a dirt floor, cracked cinder block walls, and a rusted tin roof that definitely leaked when it rained. The door was old, half-rotted wood that wouldn't even close right. I followed them, still unable to believe what was happening. I kept thinking it was a nightmare, and I'd wake up in my own bed next to the window overlooking the cornfield. But no, it was real. Too real. When we got to the coop, one of the hands opened the door, and the smell hit me like a slap to the face. It smelled of old chicken litter, dampness, and neglect. There were spider webs everywhere, clinging to the corners and hanging from the ceiling. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust and dry feathers. A small window, about the size of a notepad, faced the big house, the house I built with my own hands in 1989. I built it wood frame by wood frame, working from sunup until sundown. The men threw my things inside without a care. My satchel fell open, and my clothes scattered across the filthy floor. Ilara's pictures slipped out of their wooden frames. My radio rolled into a corner. I started to step in to gather everything, but Marcus grabbed my arm so hard his fingers left a bruise. He leaned close to my face, and I remember his words, burned into my memory like a brand. "This is your place now, old man. All your life, you spent digging in the dirt like an animal. Well, keep digging. This coop is more than you deserve. Do you know what it feels like when your own son, the one you held when he was a baby, the one you nursed when he had the measles at 5 years old, the one you comforted when his first girlfriend left him? Do you know what it feels like when he says something like that to you? It feels like your soul is ripped from your body and stomped on right in front of you. My knees literally went weak. I had to lean against the Coop wall to keep from collapsing. My heart hammered so fast I thought I'd have a heart attack right there. Maybe it would have been better, to die right then and there, instead of living to see what came next. Marcus turned and walked toward the big house. The two hired hands followed him. I watched them go. Their figures got smaller and smaller until they went inside and shut the door. My house. The house where I raised my 3 children. The house where Ilara died 5 years ago. In our bed, slowly eaten up by bone cancer until she couldn't fight anymore. The house where we celebrated baptisms, birthdays, Christmases. The house that was my whole life. I stood there, outside the Coop. I don't know how long. The sun was setting. The sky turned orange, and then purple. I could hear Curtis O'Neill's dogs barking in the distance. A rooster crowed, even though it was past time. Finally, I stepped into the Coop, closed the door behind me, and sat down on the dirt floor amongst my scattered things. I picked up Ilara's photo and wiped it clean with the sleeve of my shirt. In that picture, she's smiling, wearing her white wedding dress. I'm next to her in my borrowed suit, both of us standing in front of the church. We were 20 years old. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life, with those deep dark eyes and that smile that could light up any room. Just 3 months earlier, barely 3 months, Marcus had come to see me with some papers. He told me the government was offering grants to farmers, that I qualified, but I needed to sign some documents. I told him I couldn't read, that I never learned because as a boy, I had to work the fields with my daddy. There was no time for school. Marcus told me not to worry, that he was my son, that I could trust him, and that these were just formalities to receive the support money. I trusted him. Of course I did. He was my firstborn, my pride, the only one of my children with a college degree. I made my mark on the papers where he pointed, on 4 or 5 different pages. He didn't even explain exactly what they said. Then he left with the documents, and I waited for that government support that never came. A month ago, when I asked him about the money, he laughed. He laughed right in my face and told me, "There's no grant, you old fool." Those papers were to transfer the house and land property into my name. Now everything is legally mine. You should thank me for letting you stay here. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke, but when he showed me the papers, the official property registration documents, I understood it was true. He had tricked me. My own son had stolen everything I owned, using my illiteracy, my trust, and my fatherly love against me. When I yelled at him, when I cried that it wasn't fair, that I worked my whole life for that land and that house, he told me the law was on his side, that everything was legal, and that I was an ignorant old man who didn't understand how the modern world worked. That first night in the chicken coop was the longest of my life. The mattress the hired hands had thrown in was old. It had springs sticking out that dug into my back. I fixed it up the best I could in a corner and spread a thin sheet over it. The tin roof rattled in the wind like someone was hitting it. Through the tiny window, I could see the big house, all the lights blazing. I started hearing music, laughter, and loud voices. Marcus had invited people over. He was throwing a party. I lay down on that miserable mattress with Alara's photo clutched to my chest, and for the first time in many years, I wept. I cried in silence, biting my lips so no one would hear me, though there was no one nearby. Tears streamed down my cheeks and fell onto Alara's picture. I begged her forgiveness. I whispered, "Forgive me, my love. I couldn't protect what we built together. I let our son take everything from us." The party music grew louder. I recognized those hip-hop songs Marcus likes now that he thinks he's rich. I could hear men's and women's voices shouting and laughing. My son was celebrating his triumph, celebrating that he had stripped me of my home, celebrating his new life as the owner of the property I built with the sweat of my brow for 40 years. Do you know, my friends, what hurt the most at that moment? It wasn't sleeping in a dirty coop, or the broken mattress, or the smell of chicken. It was remembering. Remembering when Marcus was born, when I held him for the first time at the Baton Rouge hospital, so tiny he fit in both my hands. Remembering when he learned to walk, taking clumsy steps on the front porch while Ilara and I watched him so he wouldn't fall. Remembering when he was 8 years old and fell off the horse, breaking his arm, and I carried him 3 miles to town because we didn't have a truck. Then remembering when he was 15 and told me, "Daddy, I want to go to college. I want to be somebody." And I answered him, "You go to college, son, even if I have to sell everything I own." And I sold things, yes. I sold our best dairy cow, our favorite, the one that gave 5 gallons of milk a day. I sold her to pay for Marcus's first semester at the university. I sold my mother's antique gold locket, the only treasure she left me, the one I plan to give to my grandchildren someday. I sold it to buy Marcus books and a computer. I worked 16 hours a day, every day, without rest. During the day, I tended my 10 acres of corn and beans. At night, I went to the market in town to load sacks of vegetables for the merchants. I earned a few extra dollars. I would get home at 2 in the morning, sleep 3 hours, and be up again at 5 to start over. I did all of that for Marcus, for my son, so he could have a better life than mine, so he wouldn't have to break his back in the field, so he could be educated and respected. And I succeeded, didn't I? He finished college. He studied agricultural business management and finance. He came back to the parish with his diploma and his degrees. I was so proud, I organized a huge party. I slaughtered 2 hogs, invited the whole parish, and told everyone, "My son is a college-educated man, the first one in the family." Now, that same son had made me live in a chicken coop. That night, lying in the dark with Marcus's party music blaring in the distance, I realized something. My son had become a stranger. The sweet boy I knew, the one who cried when he saw injured animals, the one who hugged me before bed, that boy was gone. In his place was a cold, ambitious man, capable of betraying his own father for money and property. My friends, you know what real betrayal is. It's not being robbed. It's not being lied to. Real betrayal is when the person you love most in the world, the person you'd give your life for without a second thought, sticks a knife in your back and then tell you that you deserved it. That is dying, but still breathing. That is having your heart beat, but feeling it dead inside your chest. The next day, Sunday, I woke up with the sun streaming through the little window. My back ached from the bad mattress. I sat on the edge of the mattress and looked around the coop in the daylight. The cinder block walls had huge cracks. I could stick my hand through some of them. The tin roof had holes. I could see patches of blue sky. The dirt floor was uneven. There was a puddle of dirty water in one corner, probably from the rain last week. There was no bathroom, just an old bucket in the other corner that I'd have to use for my needs. A light bulb hung from the ceiling, connected to a wire running from the main house. I flipped the switch, and it worked. At least I had that, a weak yellowish light, but light nonetheless. In another corner, there was a small kerosene stove that Alara used to use when we went camping down by the river. I would have to cook my meals there. I started organizing my things the best I could. I folded my clothes and put them back in the satchel. I cleaned the dirt floor with an old broom I found. I swept up the dry feathers and dust. I found pieces of cardboard in a trash pile near the coop and laid them on the floor to cover it a little. With a rusty nail I found, I hung Alara's picture on the wall, right above the mattress. I stood in front of the photo and spoke to her as if she could hear me. "Alara, my love, it's come to this. Forgive me that I couldn't protect our home. Forgive me that I let Marcus do this to us. But I promise you, my life, I promise I'm going to find a way to fix this. I don't know how, but I'm going to do it." If you're listening to this, if something similar has happened to you, or you know someone who's been betrayed by their own family, leave a comment. Tell me your story. Because sometimes, my friend, the only thing that keeps us sane in the middle of the pain is knowing we're not alone, that others have been through the same thing and survived. I survived, and I'm going to tell you how, but first, I have to tell you what happened next. What Marcus made me do during that week I lived in the coop like a dog. On Monday morning at 6 o'clock sharp, Marcus knocked on the coop door with his knuckles. 3 dry taps that woke me from the light sleep I had barely managed to catch. I got up from the mattress. My back creaked like old wood. I opened the door, and there was my son, dressed in clean, expensive denim and a pressed white shirt. He looked me up and down. I was still in the same clothes I'd slept in, wrinkled and dirty with dust. He told me that now that I lived there, I had to earn my keep. Every morning at 6, I had to be ready to work the garden plot. I had to pull weeds, water the tomato and pepper plants, and feed the hogs in the back corral. He used these exact words: "Since you're living here rent-free, you're going to earn it with work. I don't support freeloaders." I clenched my fists, but didn't say anything. What could I say? It was my land, my house, but the papers said otherwise. That's how my routine started that week. Every day, I got up with the neighbor, Curtis O'Neill's, rooster crowing. I washed my face with cold water from a bucket. I filled the night before at the spigot near the coop. The water was so cold, it made my teeth hurt when I splashed my face. I put on the same work clothes I had worn for the last 30 years. Simple work shirt and denim overalls, patched at the knees. My old leather boots, the ones Alara gave me for our 20th anniversary, still fit even though they were so worn I could feel the pebbles on the road through the soles. I left the coop when the sun was just peeking out behind the trees, painting the sky pink and orange. I walked to the garden plot, about 100 yards away, the plot I planted 15 years ago, where I grew tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs. Every plant there I put in with my own hands. Every row I opened with my hoe. And now I had to work it as if I were an employee, as if it weren't mine. I spent the mornings bent over the plants, pulling weeds, loosening the soil with the hoe. The sun grew stronger as the hours passed. The sweat ran down my back, soaking my shirt. My knees ached from being crouched for so long. At 71, the bones just aren't the same. But I kept working because I didn't want to give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing me give up. After the garden plot, I went to the hog corral. We had 6 big, fat hogs that Marcus was fattening up to sell. I threw ground corn into the concrete feeders. I changed the water in the troughs. The hogs grunted and shoved each other to get to the food first. The smell of the corral was so strong, it clung to my clothes all day, that sour, heavy smell of manure and mud. I returned to the coop around 11 in the morning, when the sun was highest and the heat was unbearable. I sat down on the ground outside the coop in the shade of an old mesquite tree growing nearby. I took out my meal, which was sparse. Cold, slightly hard leftover cornbread with reheated beans that I warmed on the kerosene stove that morning. Sometimes a roasted green pepper if I found one in the garden plot, water from the bucket to drink. That was my lunch. On Wednesday, the 3rd day in the coop, Marcus gave me money for the week. $20. He placed it in my hand and said, "This is for your food, and it's more than you deserve, old man." $20 a week. Do you know how much it costs to eat on $20 a week? You have to buy the absolute cheapest things: cornbread, beans, rice, maybe an egg if you're lucky. No meat, no chicken, no fresh vegetables. Barely enough to survive. That same Wednesday, I walked to town to buy some food. The town is about 1.5 miles from the house. It takes half an hour to walk. I went into Ms. Loretta's general store, an elderly woman who has known my family for 30 years. She saw me come in, and her face changed. She looked sad. She greeted me softly and asked what I needed. I asked for a pound of beans, a pound of rice, 10 cornbread patties, and 2 eggs. She put everything in a plastic bag without saying anything, but I could see she was looking at me with pity. When I went to pay, Ms. Loretta came up to the counter and whispered, "Mr. Clay, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. If you need anything, anything at all, you tell me." I thanked her, but told her I was fine, that I didn't need anything. That was a lie. I needed a lot of things. I needed my house. I needed my dignity. I needed my son not to be a disgrace. But I didn't tell her that. I took my bag and left the store. On the way back, I ran into 2 neighbors, Curtis O'Neill and his son Darius. They've known me for years. I used to sell them corn from my harvest. They greeted me, but their eyes didn't look at me the same way. They looked at me with that gaze people give you when they feel sorry for you, when they know something bad happened but don't know what to say. I just said good morning and kept walking, my head held high, even though inside I was dying of shame. I got back to the coop and stored the food in a cardboard box I was using as a pantry. I sat down on the mattress and for the first time in many years, wondered how I had reached this point. Me, Clarence Jefferson, who worked his whole life honestly, who raised 3 children, who supported his family, who was respected in the community. Now I was living in a chicken coop, eating cold beans, and using a bucket as a toilet. Sunday arrived, the 4th day since he'd kicked me out of the house. I thought it would be a quiet day, that I could rest a little, but mid-morning trucks started rolling in, one after another. Loud music, laughter, voices. Marcus was throwing another party, but this one was bigger than Saturday's. I peeked through the coop window and saw about 20 people in the yard. Men in expensive clothes, designer shirts, Stetson hats, women in tight dresses and heavy makeup. I recognized some of them. They were city folks, businessmen, company owners. Marcus had invited them to show off his new property, to show them that he was an important man now. They set up long tables with white tablecloths on the porch. I saw trays of barbecue, bottles of expensive bourbon and whiskey, and beer chilling in coolers. A man was grilling meat on the large pit I built 10 years ago. Beef ribs and smoked sausage that smelled delicious, even from where I was. I stayed in the coop for a while, watching through the window, but then I thought I couldn't stay hidden all day, that I needed to go out, even if just to walk around. I went out and headed toward the garden plot, where I thought no one would bother me. I started pulling some weeds that had grown up between the tomato plants, just to have something to do, to keep from feeling useless. I was crouched down with the hoe in my hands when I heard Marcus's voice. He was speaking loudly. He wanted everyone to hear him. I turned slightly, still crouched, and saw him with a group of 5 or 6 men, all with drinks in their hands, all well-dressed. Marcus pointed toward where I was and said, with a laugh in his voice I'd never heard before, "See that old man in the garden plot? That's my daddy. All his life he was just a simple farmer, never amounted to anything. He worked this land for 40 years and never owned more than these few acres. Now I allow him to live in the old chicken coop and work for his food. That's life, fellas. The strong prosper, the weak serve." The men laughed, a loud, mocking laughter. One of them said something I couldn't quite catch, but it made the others laugh even harder. Marcus kept talking, saying that he had gone to college, that he had learned how to run a business, and that's why he was successful now, while his father remained an ignorant farmer. I stayed crouched there, gripping the handle of the hoe so hard my knuckles were white. I felt the blood rush to my head, hot and boiling. I wanted to stand up, walk over to those men, and yell the truth at them. Tell them that I built that house with my hands, board by board, that I had worked that land since I was 15. When I inherited it from my father, that those big pecan trees giving shade where they were standing, I planted them 25 years ago. That the well they used to wash their hands, I dug it with the help of 2 neighbors. It took 3 weeks of digging under the sun. Tell them that Marcus was able to go to college because I sold my best cow, because I worked 16 hours a day for years, because my wife Ilara sewed clothes for other people at night to bring in extra money. Tell them that everything Marcus had was because of me, because of my work, because of my sacrifices. But I didn't. I stayed silent, bent over the dirt, pulling weeds with trembling hands. Why didn't I yell? Pride, I suppose. I didn't want those strangers to see me break. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing an old man crying from rage and pain. I didn't want Marcus to see that he had broken me. So I swallowed the words, swallowed the rage, and kept working, as if I hadn't heard a thing. The party continued all afternoon. The music was so loud, it made the coop walls vibrate. Every so often, I heard explosions of laughter, shouts, the clinking of bottles in a toast. The smell of the grilled meat drifted over to me and made my stomach growl. I had only eaten some cold cornbread with salt that morning, nothing else. Around 6 in the evening, I called my middle son, Jamal. He lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and works as an accountant for a company. He answered after several rings. He sounded busy. I told him what was happening, that Marcus had kicked me out of the house, that I was living in the chicken coop, that he was making me work for food. Jamal was silent for a long time. Then he said he was going to come down and talk to Marcus, that he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Jamal arrived the following Tuesday evening. I saw his small, old car park in the yard. Jamal doesn't make a lot of money and has 3 children to support. I watched him get out. I saw how he looked toward the coop, toward where I was standing in the doorway. His face twisted into a grimace of pain. He walked toward the house and went in without knocking. I stayed outside waiting. I could hear voices from inside, Jamal speaking loudly, Marcus answering even louder. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew what they were talking about. After about 20 minutes, Jamal came out of the house. Marcus followed him to the door. I heard Marcus say, "If you're so worried about the old man, take him home with you. Put him in your apartment with your wife and kids." Marcus paused, then added, "Oh, you can't? Then mind your own business." Jamal walked over to me. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying or holding back tears. He put a hand on my shoulder and told me he was sorry, that he had talked to Marcus, but there was no way to reason with him. He said his apartment was too small, that there was barely enough room for the 5 of them, and that he had no way to take me in. He handed me $50, telling me he would send me money every week, whatever he could spare. Then he got back into his car and drove away without looking back at me. I think he was too ashamed. I also spoke on the phone with Shayla, my youngest, my daughter. She lives in Houston, Texas, with her husband and 2 daughters. She works as a nurse at a hospital. When I told her what Marcus had done, she started crying. She said she couldn't believe it. How could her brother do such a thing? She told me she would send me money, that she would do whatever she could to help. But she also said she couldn't come home. She had to work. Her daughters were in school, and traveling that distance took time and money. I told her I understood, not to worry, but when I hung up the phone, I sat on the mattress and felt more alone than ever. On Friday night, the 6th day in the coop, Marcus threw another party, smaller than Sundays, but just as loud. I was lying on the mattress trying to sleep when I heard the house door open. Men's voices, drunken laughter, footsteps crossing the yard, coming closer to the coop. Suddenly, someone punched the coop wall from the outside. A heavy blow that made the tin roof rattle. Then another punch. Laughter. A voice shouted, "Hey, old man in the coop, lay an egg for us." More laughter. Another blow to the wall. Another voice, "Grandpa chicken." Cluck, cluck, cluck. Dupa and drunken laughter. I lay there in the dark, my fists clenched, my jaw tight, my teeth aching. My heart was racing, fast, so fast. I felt a rage, so immense I thought my chest would explode. I wanted to go out, confront them, yell at them to leave, but there were several of them. They were drunk, and I was a 71-year-old man. I wouldn't accomplish anything but further humiliation. The banging continued for a while. Then the voices moved away, returning to the house. The music kept playing until past midnight. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay there looking at the tin ceiling, thinking that I couldn't go on like this, that I had to do something, anything. Understand me, friends. I could have left. I could have walked to town, taken a bus to Baton Rouge, stayed in a shelter or on the street. I could have asked Jamal to let me sleep in his living room, even on the floor. I could have told Shayla to send me money for a plane ticket to Texas. But I didn't want to leave. This was my land. This was my life. My Alara was born here. My 3 children were born here. We buried my father here when he died. We planted every tree here, dug every row, built every wall. I wasn't going to let Marcus run me off like a dog. I wasn't going to give him that victory. I wanted justice. I wanted to get back what was mine. And even though I didn't know how, even though I was an old farmer who couldn't read or write, I was going to find a way. Because you can't take a man's dignity unless he hands it over to you. And I was not willing to hand mine over to Marcus. On Saturday morning, The seventh day in the coop. I woke up before dawn, not from the neighbor's rooster this time, but because I couldn't keep sleeping. My back ached so much that every time I moved, it felt like needles were sticking into my kidneys. I sat up on the mattress with the thin blanket over my shoulders because it was still cold. That pre-dawn chill that gets right into your bones. I sat there in the dark, looking at Alara's photo, hanging on the wall, barely visible in the faint light coming through the little window. And I started to remember. I don't know why at that moment. Maybe because I needed to remember that things were once different, that I was once more than an old man living in a chicken coop. I remembered the day Marcus was born. It was March of 1985. I was 37, Alara was 35. We had been married 15 years. And finally, after so much asking, so much praying, God sent us our first child. I was at the hospital in Baton Rouge in the waiting room, pacing back and forth like a caged lion. The walls were that pale green all hospitals have, with the smell of disinfectant that makes you dizzy if you breathe it in too long. When the nurse came out and told me it was a boy, that Alara was fine, that I could go in and see the Martiam, I nearly fell to my knees right there. I went into the room and saw my Alara lying in bed, her hair damp with sweat, but smiling with that smile that lit up everything. And in her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was my son, my Marcus. I held him for the first time, and friends, I don't know if you've had that experience, but when you hold your first child, it's like the world stops. He was so tiny, so fragile. He fit perfectly in my arms. His eyes were closed, his little face wrinkled and red, his tiny fists clenched. And I made him a promise right there in that hospital room. I told him, even though he couldn't hear me yet, my son, I'm going to give you a better life than mine. You're going to have what I never had. You're going to go to school. You're going to be somebody. I promise you. And I kept that promise, you know. I kept it by working until my body couldn't take any more. Marcus was 3 years old when I started working 2 jobs, During the day, I worked my land. The same land my father left me when he died. 10 acres isn't much. But if you work it well, it'll feed you. I planted corn, beans, squash, and peppers. I got up at 5 in the morning when it was still dark and went to the field with my hoe on my shoulder. I worked until 3 in the afternoon, came back to the house, ate something quick that Alara had left ready for me, and washed up with cold water to get the sweat and dirt off. By 4 o'clock, I was already getting on the bus, headed for the city market. I would arrive around 5:30 at the Central Market in Baton Rouge, a huge place filled with stalls selling fruit, vegetables, meat, and flowers. The noise was tremendous, everyone shouting their prices, customers haggling, radios playing music. I worked as a loader. The merchants who sold heavy sacks, 50-pound sacks of potatoes, onions, oranges, needed help loading and unloading. I volunteered. They paid $50 a night, sometimes a little more if there was a lot of work. $50 doesn't sound like much now, but back then in the mid-'80s, it helped. It added up. I carried 50, 75-pound sacks on my back. I went up and down stairs, in and out of trucks. Sweat ran all over my body. My back was burning. My arms were trembling. Some days, I loaded 50 or 60 sacks in a single night. I finished around 11 p.m., sometimes midnight. I took the last bus back. I got home at 1 in the morning, collapsed into bed next to Alara, who was already asleep, and by 5 I was getting up again to go to the field. I did that for 10 years. 10 years of working 16, 17 hours a day. On Sundays, I rested a little more. I slept until 6, went to church with Alara and the children, because by then, Jamal and Shayla had been born. But even on Sundays, I worked in the field for a few hours. I couldn't leave it abandoned. Why did I do it? For my children, to save money for their education. Alara helped too. She sewed clothes for others at night. The neighbors would bring her pants to mend, dresses to take in or let out, shirts that needed buttons. She stayed up late with her old sewing machine, the one that made a rat-a-tat noise, like a machine gun when she sewed fast. She earned $20 or $30 per job. We kept everything in an old coffee can that we hid under the bed. Marcus was a good student. He liked school from the time he was a small child. He got good grades. The teachers liked him. In elementary school, he was the best in his class, and in middle school, too. I felt proud every time I went to parent-teacher meetings, and the teachers told me that Marcus was very smart, very diligent, that he would go far. But 1998 arrived, and that year almost destroyed us. Due to a severe drought, it didn't rain all summer. My crops dried up. The corn I had planted in April to harvest in September never grew right. The stalks stayed small and yellow. The cobs never filled out. The beans were the same. The squash died. I lost the entire harvest that year. And that was the year Marcus graduated from high school. He was 18. He had earned a high enough GPA to get into college. He wanted to study agricultural business management and finance at Southern University in Baton Rouge. I had promised him he would go to college, not to worry about the money. But the money we had saved in the coffee can for years wasn't enough. Tuition for the first semester cost $3,000, plus books, plus transportation, because he had to commute from the city every day, plus food. We needed about $5,000 just to get started. I went to the bank to ask for a loan. They said yes, they would lend me $15,000, but at a 30% annual interest rate, because the only collateral I had was my land and my harvest. And the harvest that year had been a disaster. 30% was an outrageous amount. It meant I would end up paying almost double, but I accepted. I signed the papers with my cross. Just like years later, I signed the papers Marcus put in front of me. I left the bank with the money and gave it to Marcus for his university. But it still wasn't enough. Midway through the first semester, Marcus called me, saying he needed more money for books and a special school project. I had no idea where to get more. I already owed the bank, and I had spent all our savings. So I looked at Bessie. Bessie was my dairy cow, the best I had ever owned. She was a Holstein, white with black spots, with big, gentle eyes. I had bought her as a calf 5 years earlier. I raised her myself. She gave 5 gallons of good creamy milk a day. Alara used that milk to make cheese that we sold in town. She made cream and butter. Bessie was part of the family. My children loved her. They gave her affectionate names, fed her grass by hand. I sold her. I took her to the cattle market one Tuesday morning. A man from another town offered me $800 for her. It was a good price, but it broke my heart. I handed the rope to the buyer. I watched him lead her away to his truck. Bessie turned to look at me. She mooed once, as if asking why I was sending her off with a stranger. I couldn't watch her go. I turned around and walked quickly toward the market exit. With that $800, I sent more money to Marcus. But we still needed more for the second semester. Then Alara told me to sell my mother's silver locket. My mother had died 10 years earlier. in 1988. Before she died, she gave me her only treasures, an antique gold locket with an engraved cross. My grandmother had given it to my mother when she got married, and my mother gave it to me so I could give it to my children, or grandchildren someday. It was worth about $300, maybe more. I sold it to a jeweler in the center of Baton Rouge. The jeweler looked at it through a magnifying glass, weighed it, and offered me $250. I told him fine. He gave me the cash, and I put the bills in my pocket. When I left the jewelry store, I sat down on a bench in the main square and cried. I cried because I was selling the last physical memory I had of my mother, because I was betraying her trust by not keeping it for my grandchildren, as she wished. But I did it for Marcus, so he could continue his studies, so he could have the better life I promised him when he was born. Marcus finished college 4 years later, in 2002. I went to his graduation, Alara too, and Jamal and Shayla, even though they were still young. We sat in the huge university auditorium among hundreds of families when they called the name Marcus Jefferson, and he walked onto the stage to pick up his diploma. Dressed in a black gown and cap, I stood up and applauded so hard my hands hurt. Alara cried with happiness. Jamal and Shayla shouted their brother's name. After the ceremony, we took pictures outside the university. Marcus with his diploma, smiling wide. Me beside him in my white dress shirt, the only good shirt I owned. Alara on the other side in her floral dress that she had bought especially for that day. I have that picture stored somewhere in the chicken coop. I haven't been able to find it among all the things they threw in here. Marcus returned to the parish with his degree and big ideas. He told me he wanted to modernize the farm, that with his knowledge of agronomy and business, we could increase production, sell more, and earn more. I believed him. Of course I did. He had gone to college. He knew things I never did. I barely knew how to read numbers, but he understood balance sheets, loans, and contracts. I gradually gave him control of the farm. He decided what to plant, when to plant, and where to sell. I kept working the land, but now Marcus was giving the orders. And it worked at first. The harvests improved because Marcus used modern fertilizers, better seeds, techniques he had learned in college. We started earning more money. Then Marcus started buying land from the neighbors. Mr. Curtis O'Neill, who was very old and had no children, sold him 5 acres for a good price. Mrs. Walker, Mr. Elias Thompson's widow, sold him another 3. My Marcus said the more land we had, the more we could produce, the more we could earn. I agreed. Everything sounded good, but there were papers to sign, many papers. Marcus brought me contracts, bank documents, deeds. He put them in front of me and told me where to put my cross. He quickly explained what they were about, using words I didn't understand. Mortgage, collateral, assignment of rights, transfer of property. I would ask him, and he would tell me not to worry, to trust him, that it was all to grow the family business. And I signed. I put my cross on every line he pointed to, because he was my son, because I had sent him to college so he could learn these things, because I thought he would never betray me. Now lying in this chicken coop, 7 years later, I understand what happened. Marcus was preparing the ground from the moment he returned from college. He was slowly putting the properties in his name. Piece by piece, he made me sign documents that I thought were for loans or to buy more land, but they were actually to transfer everything to him. He took my land, my house, my life, with my own signature. He used my illiteracy and my trust against me. And the worst part, my friends, the worst part, is that I allowed him to do it. I gave him the tools to destroy me. I paid for his college education with the sweat of my brow, with the sale of my cow, with my mother's locket, only for him to use that knowledge to steal from me. On Monday morning, the 8th day in the chicken coop, I woke up with that rage still in my chest. But it wasn't just rage anymore. It was something else, determination. I decided I wasn't going to sit around waiting to die in that place. I was going to do something. I didn't know what, but something. After working the garden plot that morning, I cleaned up the best I could with cold water from the bucket. I put on my least dirty clothes and walked to town. It was around 10 in the morning. The sun was already beating down hard. The dirt road kicked up dust with every step. I passed by Curtis O'Neill's house, past Ms. Loretta's general store, past the school where my children went as kids. I arrived at the church, First AME Zion Church of Oakland Parish, a white building with a red shingle roof and a tall steeple that can be seen from all over the parish. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and went in. Inside, it was cool and dark, smelling of incense and candle wax. There were 3 older women praying in the front pews. I walked to the back, knelt, and said the Lord's Prayer. Then I stood up and went to the vestry. I knocked on the door and heard Pastor Jeremiah Stone's voice telling me to come in. I entered. Pastor Stone was sitting at his desk with papers in front of him. He is an older man, maybe 75, with white hair, thick glasses, and shaky hands. He's known me for 40 years, ever since he came to the parish as a young pastor. He looked at me, and his face changed. He told me I looked terrible, asking what had happened to me. I sat down in the chair across from his desk and told him everything. I told him about Marcus's deception, the papers I signed without knowing, how he kicked me out of my house, the chicken coop, the humiliations, the party where Marcus mocked me in front of his friends. Pastor Stone listened in silence, shaking his head slowly, his face growing sadder. When I finished talking, he took off his glasses and wiped his eyes with a handkerchief. He told me he couldn't believe that Marcus, whom he himself had baptized as a baby, would do something like that. Then he told me something that changed everything. He said I wasn't the only one. He told me that Curtis O'Neill, my neighbor, had come to talk to him 2 weeks earlier, saying that Marcus had tricked him too. He said Marcus sold 2 acres of land to Marcus for $25,000 because Marcus told him it was a fair price. But later, Curtis found out that Marcus resold that land to an agribusiness company for $100,000, that the papers Curtis signed didn't say what Marcus explained. Pastor Stone told me that Lila Mae Walker, Mr. Thompson's widow, had also come to complain. Marcus convinced her to sell him half her property when her husband had just died, and she was confused and grieving. He paid her very little, taking advantage of the fact that she didn't understand numbers. And Eli Thompson, another neighbor, was having similar problems with Marcus. Pastor Stone looked me straight in the eye and told me to go talk to them, that maybe together, we could do something. He gave me their addresses, though I already knew where they lived. He put a hand on my shoulder and told me to pray, to have faith, that God doesn't abandon the righteous. I left the church with my heart pounding, not from fear, but from something close to hope. If Marcus had tricked more people, if there were more victims, then maybe we could unite. Maybe we could fight together. That evening, around 6 o'clock, I walked up to Curtis O'Neill's house. He lives about half a mile from my property, on a smaller farm than mine. I knocked on the door, and his wife, Ruth, opened it. She saw me and looked surprised. She asked what was wrong with my face, that I looked older. I told her I needed to talk to Curtis about something important. Curtis came out and invited me in. His house is simple: cinder block walls, concrete floor, a wooden table in the kitchen. I sat down on a chair, and Ruth poured me coffee in a chipped mug. The coffee was hot and sweet. It tasted like heaven after days of drinking only water. Curtis sat down across from me. He's 68, younger than me, but he looks older because he had a stroke 3 years ago, and the right side of his face is slightly dropped. He drags his right leg a little when he walks. His hair is completely white. He uses a cane. I told him my story. I told him everything, just like I told Pastor Stone. Curtis listened and nodded, as if none of it surprised him. When I finished, he sighed heavily and told me his story. He said that a year ago, Marcus came to him with a proposal, that he needed 5 acres of land to expand his operation, and he offered $25,000 for them. Curtis had 12 acres total. 5 wasn't too much to lose. Marcus showed him papers, explaining that it was a simple sale, and he just needed to sign. Curtis, who also can't read well, trusted him. He signed. Months later, Curtis heard from another neighbor that Marcus had sold those 5 acres to an agribusiness company for $100,000, 4 times what he paid for it. When Curtis confronted him, Marcus told him that's called doing business, that he bought low and sold high, and everything was legal. But the worst part, Curtis told me, was when I checked the papers with my nephew, who can read. My nephew told me the documents didn't say exactly what Marcus explained, that there was fine print I didn't understand, that they had practically stolen the land because the actual price listed in the contract was even less than the $25,000. Ruth, who was listening from the stove, started to cry. She told me those 5 acres were the best on their entire property, where they grew the corn they sold, and it was their livelihood. Now they barely had enough to live on. I felt my blood boil. I asked Curtis if he was willing to fight, to seek justice. He looked at me with those tired eyes and said yes. He had nothing left to lose. If there was a way to recover something, he would be willing. The next day, Tuesday, I went to see Eli Thompson. He lives on the other side of the parish. He has a small property where he grows peppers and tomatoes. He is a 60-year-old man, stronger than me, tall, with huge hands from so much work. I found him in his field cutting peppers. When I told him why I was there, he dropped the sack of peppers on the ground and told me to come into his house. We sat down under a mesquite tree in his yard. He also had his story with Marcus. He told me that 2 years ago, he urgently needed money because his wife had kidney failure. She needed dialysis, which cost a fortune. Marcus offered to lend him $10,000, but with a guarantee. Eli had to put his property up as collateral. Marcus told him it was just a formality, that as long as he paid the loan installments, there would be no problem. Eli signed, received the money, paid for his wife's treatment, and started paying the loan installments to Marcus. But the interest rate was extremely high, almost impossible to pay. Eli fell about 2 months behind on the payments because he couldn't afford it. Then Marcus told him that because of the delinquency, he had the right to keep Eli's property, that the contract said so. Eli nearly went crazy. He went with his son, who knows how to read, to review the contract, and it was true. The fine print said that if he fell 2 consecutive payments behind, the property automatically transferred to Marcus. Eli had to sell his best tractor and his tools, everything valuable he owned, to gather the money and catch up. Now he is paying the loan with interest rates that are drowning him. But at least he hasn't lost his land yet. He told me Marcus is a wicked man who takes advantage of humble people who don't understand contracts or fine print. And he also wanted to do something, but he didn't know what. I told him what I told Curtis, that perhaps together we could fight. That same afternoon, the three of us, Curtis, Eli, and I, went to Lila Mae Walker's house. She lives in town, in a small house next to the square. She is a 65-year-old woman, tiny, with her hair in a bun and wrinkled hands. She was widowed a year and a half ago when her husband, Mr. Thompson, died of a heart attack. She opened the door and was surprised to see the three of us together. We told her we needed to talk about something serious. She invited us into her living room and offered us iced tea. We sat on her old sofa and we told her our stories. She started crying before we finished. She told us that Marcus had tricked her too. 2 months after her husband died, when she was still grieving and couldn't even think straight, Marcus came to her house. He told her that Mr. Thompson owed him money, that he had a signed promissory note. He showed her papers she couldn't read well because she didn't have her glasses, and was crying anyway. Marcus told her Mr. Thompson owed $10,000. If she couldn't pay, she could give him half of her property to settle the debt. Lila Mae, who didn't know what to do, who didn't understand numbers, who just wanted to be left alone with her grief, accepted. She signed the papers. Marcus took 3 of the 6 acres that Mr. Thompson had worked his whole life. Later, Lila Mae went to her brother, who lives in Atlanta and knows about law, to tell him what happened. Her brother told her it was likely fraud, that Mr. Thompson had never told anyone he owed money, and that the promissory note was probably fake. But when they went to confront Marcus, he showed them the note, signed with Mr. Thompson's mark, and registered with a notary. Everything was legal according to the law. Lila Mae told us, weeping, that she didn't know what to do, that she needed the money from the harvest of her remaining 3 acres to survive, and she was afraid Marcus would take those too. The 4 of us sat in that small living room, silent, each with our story of pain and betrayal. I looked at them one by one, at Curtis with his half-droopy face, at Eli with his huge hands trembling with rage, at Lila Mae wiping her tears with the corner of her apron. And I told them what I felt in my heart. My friends, Marcus didn't just betray me. He's stealing from all of us. He's taking advantage of us because we're old, because we can't read, because we trust. But if we stand together, if we fight together, maybe we can do something. Eli asked what we could do. None of us had money for a lawyer. None of us knew anything about the law. We were 4 old farmers against a young, educated man with legal documents on his side. That's when I remembered Shayla, my daughter in Texas. She worked as a nurse and earned in dollars. She had told me many times that if I needed money, she would send it. I had never asked her for anything, because I am proud, and I don't like to be a burden on my children. But this was different. This wasn't just for me. This was for justice. I told the 3 of them that I had a daughter who might be able to help us with money to hire an attorney. Curtis said he had a cousin who was a lawyer in Baton Rouge who might charge us a cheap rate if we explained the situation. Eli said he could also put in some money. Not much, but something. We agreed. I would call Shayla that night. Curtis would call his lawyer cousin, and we would meet again in 2 days to see what we could do. I left Lila Mae's house as it was getting dark. I walked back to my chicken coop with a strange feeling in my chest. The rage was still there, The pain was still there, but now there was something more. There was purpose. There was hope. That night, sitting on my mattress with the weak light from the bulb, I dialed Shayla's number in the United States from my old phone. She answered after several rings. Her voice sounded tired. She said she had just gotten off her shift at the hospital. I told her everything again. I told her about the Coop, the humiliations, and now I told her what I had discovered. That Marcus had done the same thing to 3 other people. That we were 4 victims. And that we needed an attorney, but didn't have the money. Shayla started crying on the phone. I heard her sobbing on the other end. I heard her telling her husband in English what I was telling her. Then she told me yes, that she would send me money, everything she had saved. If we needed $3,000 or $5,000 or whatever it took, she would send it. Then she gave me the other news. She said she had spoken to the journalist her husband knew. His name was Andre Dre Jones. He worked for a big paper called The People's Truth, a paper that published stories about social injustices, corruption, and abuses of power. Dre Jones had told Shayla that our story seemed important, that he wanted to come to the parish to investigate, interview us, and take pictures. He asked if he could come in 2 days. I told him yes, to come whenever he wanted. Shayla told me Dre would arrive on Friday, and she would give him my phone number so he could contact me. Friday arrived. It was the 12th day since they had put me in the chicken coop. I was sitting outside the coop around 11 in the morning when I saw a car I didn't recognize pull up. A white sedan. It parked near the property entrance. A young man got out, about 30, wearing jeans, a denim shirt, and a backpack over his shoulder. He had dark, slightly long hair, a few days' stubble, and sunglasses. He walked over, called me by name, and I told him, yes, I was Clarence Jefferson. He introduced himself, said he was Andre Jones, the journalist. He extended his hand and I shook it. His hand was soft, not like mine, full of calluses. He told me Shayla had told him my story, that he wanted to hear it in my own voice, see where I lived, and meet the other people Marcus had defrauded. I told him to come in, that I would show him everything. I took him to the chicken coop, opened the door, and we went inside. Dre looked around. I watched his face change, his brow furrow. He took a camera out of his backpack and started taking pictures. Photos of the broken mattress on the floor, the bucket in the corner, the bulb hanging from the ceiling, Alar's photo on the wall. He asked me to pose in the coop doorway. He took several pictures. He asked me to show him my hands. He took them in his and photographed them, my old calloused hands. Then he pulled out a small digital recorder and asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. We sat outside the coop on the ground in the shade of the mesquite tree, and I told him everything again. I told him about my life with Alara, how we raised our 3 children, the sacrifices I made to send Marcus to college. I told him about the deception, the papers I signed without knowing, how they kicked me out of my house. I told him about the humiliations. I told him about Curtis, Eli, and Lila Mae. Dre listened and recorded. Every now and then, he asked questions. He asked me to give him more details about something. We talked for about 2 hours. Then he asked me to show him the big house, my house. We walked over there. The door was locked. Marcus wasn't home. He had gone to Baton Rouge that day. Dre took photos of the house from outside, the windows, the porch where the parties had been held. Afterward, we went to find Curtis O'Neill. We found him on his property. He was watering his garden plot. Dre asked him to tell his story. He took out the recorder again. Curtis told everything, just like me. Dre took photos of Curtis, his humble house, his fields. Then we went to Eli Thompson's place, where he was fixing his old tractor. Dre interviewed him too, and took photos. Finally, we went to Lila Mae Walker's house. She opened the door and let us in. When Dre asked her to tell him what Marcus had done to her, she started to cry. Dre let her cry for a while. Then in a gentle voice, he asked her to continue. She told everything between sobs. Dre took pictures of her, of the photo of her dead husband she kept on a shelf. At the end of the day, Dre told us he was going to write the article, that it would be published in the paper on Saturday. He said he was going to tell our entire story, that he was going to expose what Marcus had done. He asked me if I wasn't afraid, if I didn't fear reprisals. I told him no, I had nothing left to lose, and the truth had to come out. On Saturday morning, the 13th day, Curtis O'Neill arrived at the chicken coop very early, around 7 o'clock. He had a newspaper in his hands, The People's Truth. He put it in front of me with a huge smile. Right there on the cover was a large article with photos. The title read in huge black letters, "Educated son evicts farmer. Father to live in chicken coop. Celebrates in stolen home." I can't read, but Curtis read the entire article to me aloud. Andre Jones had written our whole story. He told about me, Ilara, how I worked my whole life, how I sent Marcus to college. He told about the deception, the chicken coop, the humiliations. He included the stories of Curtis, Eli, and Lila Mae. He explained the fraud technique Marcus used, how he took advantage of older people who couldn't read. He quoted attorney Russell Vance, saying it was a clear case of fraud and dispossession. The photos were powerful. Me standing in the coop doorway, in my old clothes, my calloused hands in close-up, the miserable interior of the coop, Ilara's photo on the wall, and the big house in the background, Curtis with his tired face, Lila Mae crying, Eli with his huge hands clenched into fists. Curtis and I walked to town that morning. Everyone had the newspaper. They were selling it at Ms. Loretta's general store, at the newspaper stand in the square. People were gathered in small groups on the corners, reading and discussing. When they saw me pass, some came up to me, put a hand on my shoulder, told me they were with me, that what Marcus had done was a disgrace. Ms. Loretta came out of her store when she saw me pass. She hugged me, crying. She said she couldn't believe Marcus was capable of doing that the whole parish was talking about it. And people were outraged. On Sunday morning, the 14th day, a truck arrived with the logo of a Baton Rouge television channel. 3 people got out. A young reporter with a microphone, a cameraman with a big camera, and a woman who seemed to be the producer. They looked for me. They asked if they could ask me a few questions for the evening news. I told them, yes. The cameraman had the camera up on a tripod. The reporter stood next to me with the microphone. He asked me questions similar to the ones Dre had asked. I answered as best I could, trying to speak clearly, even though I was nervous with that camera pointed at me. They asked me to take them to the chicken coop. They filmed everything inside. They filmed the big house. They also interviewed Curtis and Lila Mae. The reporter told me the segment would air on the evening news that Sunday. I don't have a television in the co-op. But Curtis invited me to his house to watch it. We went over around 8 p.m. We sat in his living room in front of his old television. When the news started, after the commercials, there was our segment. I saw myself on television for the first time in my life. my wrinkled face filling the screen, my voice coming out of the speakers. I looked older than I thought, more worn out. The reporter had done a good job. He told the whole story, showed the images of the chicken coop, and interviewed several neighbors who gave their opinion of Marcus. The next day, Monday, the 15th day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. They were numbers I didn't recognize. Journalists from other newspapers and radio stations wanted to interview me. Shayla called me, crying with happiness. She said the story had gone viral on the internet, that the whole country was talking about it. And Marcus. On Monday afternoon, around 6 o'clock, I heard his truck arrive. I heard him slam on the brakes with a screech of tires. Fast footsteps approaching. The coupe door burst open, so hard it nearly came off its hinges. Marcus stormed in, furious. He was pale, disheveled, with red eyes. He had a crumpled newspaper in one hand. He screamed at me. His voice trembled with rage and panic. He asked what I had done, that I had ruined him, that all his partners were canceling contracts, that the bank had called him, demanding explanations about his loans, that his clients were suing him, that his reputation was destroyed, that people were pointing at him in the street, that his own friends wouldn't answer his calls anymore. He yelled at me to stop all this, to call the papers, and say it was all a lie, that he never did anything wrong to me. He yelled that I was an ungrateful old man, that he had given me shelter and food when he could have thrown me into the street. I was sitting on my mattress, looking up at him. I stood up slowly, my knees cracked, like old wood. I stood in front of him. We were almost the same height, even though he is younger and stronger. I looked him in the eyes and said in a calm voice, calmer than I felt, "I didn't do anything, son. I just told the truth. The truth about what you did to me, what you did to Curtis, to Eli, to Lila Mae. You destroyed yourself with your own greed and your own cruelty." Marcus came closer, his face inches from mine. He threatened me. He said I would regret this, that it wouldn't end here. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't take a step back. I held his gaze. After a moment, he was the one who looked away. He crumpled the newspaper with both hands, threw it on the floor, and rushed out of the coupe. I heard him get into his truck, start the engine, and roar away. On Tuesday, the 16th day, Attorney Vance called all four of us. He told us to come to his office, that he had news. We made the trip to Baton Rouge again, riding in Curtis's old truck. We arrived mid-morning. The attorney greeted us with a smile. He told us he had finished preparing the class action lawsuit against Marcus Jefferson for fraud, forgery of documents, and dispossession of property. He said he had gone to the courthouse that morning and officially filed it. The judge had admitted it due to the severity of the facts and the public scandal it had generated. But there was more. The attorney told us that the district attorney had also opened an investigation on its own against Marcus. When a case becomes so public, when there is so much social scandal, the authorities cannot ignore it. He said they would likely subpoena Marcus for questioning and would investigate the notary who certified the fraudulent documents. He said this was getting serious for my son. A week later, on the 23rd day, we had the first hearing in the Baton Rouge courthouse. Curtis drove me again in his truck. Eli and Lila Mays also came. We arrived early, around 8 in the morning. The courthouse was a large old building in the center of the city, with columns at the entrance and marble floors inside. We entered the courtroom. It was a large room, with many wooden pews like a church, a high desk in the front where the judge sat, and 2 tables on the sides for the attorneys. We sat in the pews on the left. Minutes later, Marcus and his lawyer entered. They sat in the pews on the right. It was the first time I had seen Marcus since he came to scream at me in the chicken coop. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and his suit was wrinkled. He didn't look me in the eye. His lawyer was an older man with white hair, an expensive suit, and a leather briefcase. He was probably charging a fortune. The judge entered. We all stood up. She was a woman in her 50s, wearing a black robe and glasses, with a serious face. She sat down and told us to be seated. The hearing began. Attorney Vance presented our lawsuit, read the facts, showed the fraudulent documents, and called a handwriting expert who had analyzed the signatures and confirmed some were forged or coerced. Marcus's lawyer argued that everything was legal, that the documents were certified by a notary, and there was no fraud, only normal business transactions. But his voice didn't sound very sure. The hearing lasted 3 hours. In the end, the judge said she needed time to review all the evidence, but given the severity of the accusations and the public scandal, she would take immediate protective measures. She ordered that all property transactions made by Marcus Jefferson in the last 5 years be suspended until further notice. She ordered that I, Clarence Jefferson, immediately recover the right to live in my house, in my bedroom, and that Marcus could not prevent it. She ordered the same for Curtis, Eli, and Lila Mae regarding their properties. When the judge pounded her gavel and said the hearing was over, I felt my legs go weak. Curtis hugged me. Eli had tears in his eyes. Lila Mae cried openly. That same afternoon, I returned to my house, my real house. I walked from the chicken coop to the main door. The door was open. Marcus was inside, packing some things in boxes. When he saw me enter, he stopped. We looked at each other for a long moment. I didn't say anything. I walked down the hall to my bedroom, the one I shared with Alara for 30 years. I opened the door. Everything was as I remembered. The bed with the floral quilt Alara had sewn, the old wooden dresser, the window that looked out onto the cornfield, the white painted walls that I painted myself 10 years ago, the large photo of our wedding hanging over the dresser. I sat down on the bed. The mattress sank beneath me, soft and comfortable. Nothing like the world mattress. It's a shook and Coop. I put my hands on the quilt, running my fingers over the stitches Alara had made with so much love. And I wept. I cried with relief, exhaustion, happiness, and pain. I cried for everything that had happened, for everything I had lost and recovered. I heard Marcus's truck start outside, driving away. I heard the silence afterward, the silence of my own home. I lay down on the bed, closed my eyes, and for the first time in 23 days, I truly slept. Friends listening to me, I want you to understand something. I wasn't looking for revenge against Marcus. I was only seeking justice. I just wanted to get back what was mine, what I had worked my whole life to achieve. But justice, when it finally arrives, can be very harsh. Marcus lost his reputation, his business, the trust of the community, everything because of his greed, because of his cruelty. I didn't destroy him, he destroyed himself. A month passed since that first hearing, a month in which I returned to sleeping in my bed, in my room, while Marcus had gone to rent a small apartment in Baton Rouge, a month in which Attorney Vance worked tirelessly, preparing more documents, bringing more witnesses, building the case against my son. Curtis, Eli, and Lila Mae had also recovered their rights to their properties, thanks to the judge's order. But the final trial, the definitive sentence, was still pending. The day of the sentencing was a Tuesday in October. It was cold that morning. Curtis picked me up at 7 o'clock. It was still dark. I got into his truck. I was wearing my only good shirt, the same one I wore to Marcus's college graduation years ago. The trip to Baton Rouge seemed endless. Every mile felt like an hour. Eli and Lila Mae were in the back of the truck. No one talked much. We were all lost in our thoughts. We arrived at the courthouse around 9 o'clock. There were more people than the last time. Journalists outside with cameras, neighbors from the parish who had come to support us, curious people who wanted to see how this case that had been in all the papers would end. We entered the courtroom and sat in our usual spot. Marcus arrived minutes later with his lawyer. He looked worse than the last time, much worse. He had lost weight, his hair was messy, his beard unshaven. His suit looked too big for him, as if he had lost 2 sizes in a month. The judge came in and began reading the sentence. Her voice was firm, clear, filling the entire room. She read for almost an hour. She explained that she had reviewed all the evidence, all the testimonies, all the expert reports, and that it had been proven, without a doubt, that Marcus Jefferson had committed multiple frauds, had forged documents, and had used his education and position to take advantage of vulnerable people, older people who couldn't read and who trusted him. The judge declared all property transactions null and void. She ordered that my house and my land be returned completely to my name. She ordered the same for Curtis, Eli, and Lila Mae. She ordered Marcus to repay all the money he had fraudulently obtained, with interest. She ordered him to pay compensation for moral damages to each of us. The total amount was nearly $75,000. But there was more. The judge said this case would also be referred to the criminal court, that there was sufficient evidence to consider that crimes warranting jail time had been committed, and that Marcus would face a criminal process for fraud and forgery. When the judge finished reading and pounded her gavel, I heard Marcus let out a sound like a wounded animal. I turned to look at him. His head was in his hands, his shoulders shaking. His lawyer was speaking to him in a low voice, but he wasn't responding. We left the courthouse. Outside, the journalists surrounded us. They put microphones in our faces and asked questions. I didn't want to talk much. I just said that justice had been done, that I was grateful to God and to the judge. Curtis spoke a little more. He said this was a lesson for all those who abuse the humble. On the ride back to the parish, I was quiet, looking out the window. I thought about Marcus, about how he had fallen so low. I thought that maybe I was partly to blame. Maybe I spoiled him. Maybe I gave him everything so easily that he never learned the value of things. Or maybe he just made bad choices and now had to pay for them. A week later, on a Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on my front porch drinking coffee when I saw Marcus's truck arrive. It parked in the yard. He got out slowly, as if moving his body was difficult. He walked toward where I was sitting. He looked haggard, dirty, defeated. He was wearing the same wrinkled clothes he had worn in the courtroom. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at me. I stayed seated in my usual chair with the coffee mug in my hands. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. I waited for him to speak. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. His voice cracked. Finally, he managed to say he needed to talk to me. I told him to speak. He slowly climbed the stairs and stood in front of me. I remained seated. I didn't invite him to sit down. Marcus started talking in a trembling voice. He told me he had lost everything, that the bank had taken all his assets to pay part of the compensation the judge ordered, that his wife had left him and taken the children to her mother's house, that his business partners had sued him too, that he had no job, no money, nothing, and that he would likely go to jail when the criminal process began. I told him what he expected. He had sown the wind and was now reaping the whirlwind. He nodded his head. Tears started to roll down his cheeks. Suddenly, without warning, he dropped to his knees right there on the porch floor. He put his hands together as if praying and looked up at me. He told me, crying, that he begged for my forgiveness, that he had been blind, greedy, a bad son, that greed had consumed him, turning him into a monster. He said that when he started making money from his businesses, he went crazy. He wanted more and more. He lost sight of what was important. He forgot the values I had taught him. He forgot humility, honest work, and respect for others. Marcus continued speaking between sobs. He told me that, yes, he had lost his business, his money, and his reputation. But the worst thing, the thing that hurt the most, was losing me, losing his father, destroying his family, losing himself along the way. He understood now that none of that mattered, that the only thing that truly mattered was family, love, and respect. He begged me to give him a chance to make things right, to show me he could change, that he could be the son I raised again. He said he didn't know how to do it, but he was willing to do whatever was necessary. I let him talk. I let him cry. When he finished, he remained kneeling, waiting for my answer. I took a long sip of my coffee. It was already cold. I put the mug on the small table beside me. I sat there for a long time, looking at him, thinking. I thought about the baby I had held in my arms for the first time in the hospital. I thought about the 5-year-old boy who fell off the horse, and I carried 3 miles to town with a broken arm. I thought about the teenager who helped me in the field during summer vacation, working alongside me under the sun. I thought about the proud young man with his college diploma, smiling in the photos. I thought about all the times I hugged him, comforted him, when he had nightmares as a child, and told him I loved him. And then I thought about the chicken coop, the cold nights, sleeping on that broken mattress, the hunger, the humiliations, his voice calling me an old man in front of his friends, his mocking laughter, how he sold everything I had given him for a few pieces of silver. Finally, I spoke. I told him to get up, that one man oben talk shown to another man on his knees, unless he is praying. Marcus slowly got up, wiped his tears with his shirt sleeve, and stood in front of me with his head bowed. I told him I forgave him. I saw him lift his head sharply, his eyes widening, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But I told him to wait, that I wasn't finished, that forgiving wasn't forgetting, that forgiveness didn't erase what he had done, and that while I could forgive him, the consequences of his actions were still real and painful. I told him that he hadn't just harmed me, that Curtis O'Neill, an old man of 68 with half his body paralyzed, had lost his best land because of him. That Eli Thompson almost lost his house due to a loan with criminal interest rates. That Lila Mae Walker, a widow who had just buried her husband, was tricked and stripped of half her livelihood. I told him those people also deserved justice, an apology, and they deserved for him to pay for what he did to them. Marcus nodded, crying in silence. I told him that if he truly wanted my complete forgiveness, if he truly wanted to be my son again, if he truly wanted to reclaim his place in this family, he had to earn it. Words weren't enough. True repentance is demonstrated through action. I gave him my condition. I told him he had to go to every person he had defrauded and work for them. Hard, physical labor from sunup to sundown, without pay, for a full year. He would go to Curtis O'Neill's property and work his land, the same land he stole. He would repair his house, fix his fences, and care for his animals. Then he would do the same for Eli Thompson and then for Lila Mae Walker. He would dedicate 12 months of his life to repaying them with his labor for what he took from them with his deception. Marcus looked at me with his mouth open, unable to believe what he was hearing. He started to say that a year was too long, that he was broke, that he needed to get a job to pay his debts, to support his children, to rebuild his life, and that he couldn't afford to work for free for a year. I let him speak, then raised my hand to silence him. I told him in a firm voice, firmer than he had heard me speak in years, that this was my condition. It was non-negotiable. He either accepted and complied, or he left my house and never came back, that he would cease to be my son forever. I told him I didn't want a son who could only ask for forgiveness with words, but wasn't willing to prove it through sacrifice. I told him to choose. Marcus stood there, trembling. I could see the struggle in his face, in his eyes. A part of him wanted to refuse, wanted to leave, wanted to find the easy way out as he always had. But something had changed in him. Something had been broken by everything that had happened. After what seemed like an eternity, he nodded his head. He told me, his voice broken, that yes, he accepted, and he would do what I asked. I told him to go talk to Curtis the next day, to explain that he was coming to work for him without pay for 4 months, and that Curtis would tell him what needed to be done. Marcus nodded again. He turned to leave. He reached the stairs, but before going down, he turned back and said, "Thank you." I told him not to thank me yet. I told him to thank me when he had completed his year of penance. The following Monday, Marcus went to Curtis O'Neill's house. Curtis called me on the phone that evening to tell me about it. He said Marcus had arrived early in the morning in old work clothes and explained everything. Curtis said that, at first, he didn't know whether to believe him. He thought it was some kind of trick. But he told him fine, if he really came to work, to start by cleaning the irrigation ditch, which was clogged with dirt and rocks. Curtis told me Marcus worked all day under the sun. He dug with a shovel. He removed dirt with his hands. He was completely filthy. At noon, Ruth offered him food, but Marcus said no, that he had brought his cornbread. He worked until dark and then left without saying much. That's how Marcus's months of labor began. I saw him from a distance sometimes. When I went to town, I passed near Curtis's property. I saw my son with his back bent over the rows, pulling weeds with his hands. I saw him carrying sacks of corn on his shoulder. I saw him repairing fences under the midday sun. Always dirty, always sweaty, always working. Curtis kept me updated on how things were going. He told me that at first, Marcus worked with an angry expression, throwing tools around, cursing under his breath. But little by little, something started to change. He told me that after a few weeks, Marcus wasn't complaining as much, and a month after starting, Marcus had formally apologized for tricking him, for stealing his land. And Curtis had accepted the apology. 4 months passed. Marcus finished his work on Curtis's property. He had plowed the fields for the next planting. He had repaired the barn that was falling down. He had built a new fence around the garden plot. Curtis told me Marcus had done good work, honest work, and that he was putting in real effort. Then Marcus moved on to work with Eli Thompson. Another 4 months of hard labor. Eli has more livestock than Curtis. Hogs, chickens, 2 cows. Marcus had to clean the corrals every day, feed them, and take care of them. He also helped Eli build a new shed to store the pepper harvest. They worked together, both of them under the sun, lifting wooden beams, nailing boards, putting on the tin roof. Eli told me that at first they barely spoke while they worked. But after a while, Marcus started asking him questions about how to raise the animals, about how to plant peppers, basic things that any farmer knows, but that Marcus had forgotten or never truly learned. Eli taught him patiently. He said Marcus was a good student when he set aside his pride. I saw the changes in my son every time I ran into him in town. His skin had tanned from the sun. It was no longer that pale office color he had before. He had lost the belly he was starting to get from eating well and not working. The muscles in his arms looked bigger and stronger. His hands, which used to be soft, now had calluses, blisters that had turned into thick skin. He looked more like the young man he had been before he left for college, before money and ambition changed him. One Sunday, about 6 months into his penance, Marcus came to see me at the house. It was early in the morning. I was drinking coffee on the porch as always. He came up the stairs and asked permission to sit down. I told him yes. He sat in the chair next to mine, the same chair where Alara used to sit. We were silent for a while, both looking out at the cornfield stretching out ahead, the green stalks swaying in the wind. Finally, Marcus spoke. He told me he wanted to tell me something, that he had understood things in these past months. He said that when he started working with Curtis, he hated every minute of it, that he felt humiliated to be working as a laborer in the fields he had owned, that he woke up every morning with rage and worked with rage. But gradually, that rage transformed into something else. It became understanding. He told me he finally understood what I had felt my whole life. The weariness in the muscles after a day of hard work, the burning in the hands from handling the hoe for hours, the hunger that hits you when you've worked under the sun all day, the strange pride you feel when you see the fruit of your labor, when you see the clean field, the fence repaired, the harvest gathered. Marcus told me he had realized that for years he had despised all that. He thought that because he had gone to college, because he had a degree, because he managed numbers and contracts, he was better than the people who worked the land. He saw farmers as inferior, as ignorant, and that's why he could steal from them without feeling guilty. Because in his mind, they didn't deserve what they had. He deserved more. He told me he knew now that he was completely wrong, that people like Curtis, like Eli, like Lila Mae, and like me, we were the truly strong ones. He said that working the land requires a strength he never had, a strength not just of the body, but of the spirit. That requires getting up every day, even when your body hurts, even when your back aches, even when your hands bleed. That it requires keeping going when the harvest is lost, when there is no money, when everything seems impossible. Marcus had tears in his eyes as he told me all this. He said he had been a fool, and worse than a fool, he had been cruel. He said that now, with hands full of calluses and an aching back, he understood the value of everything I had given him, of everything I had sacrificed for him. He asked for my forgiveness again, but this time it sounded different. It wasn't the desperate plea from 6 months ago. It was a forgiveness that came from a deeper, more real place. I listened to everything without interrupting him. When he finished speaking, I remained silent for a long time. Then I put my hand on his shoulder. It was the first time I had touched him since all this began. I felt his body tense under my hand, then relax. I didn't say anything. I just left my hand there for a moment. Then I removed it, and we continued sitting in silence, drinking coffee, watching the sunrise illuminate the fields. Marcus finished his 4 months with Eli and spent the last 4 months working for Lila Mae Walker. With her, he did different jobs because Lila Mae doesn't have livestock or large fields to work. Marcus repaired her entire house. He fixed the leaking roof, painted the walls that were peeling, replaced the broken windows, fixed the door that wouldn't close properly, and built her a new outdoor kitchen because the old one was falling down. He planted a small vegetable garden on her land. Lila Mae told me Marcus was very kind to her, that he always asked if she needed anything else, if she was comfortable, if the house suited her. She said he worked carefully, almost with affection, as if he were repairing his own mother's house. Lila Mae told me she had forgiven him a long time ago, that she saw Marcus had truly changed. That's how the year passed. 12 full months of hard work from sunup to sundown without pay. 12 months of humility, service, and redemption. When Marcus finished his last day of work at Lila Mae's house, I decided it was time to do something special. I organized a family dinner. I called Jamal to come from Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife and children. I called Shayla to fly from Houston, Texas, with her husband and daughters. I told them it was important, that I needed them to be here. Both told me yes, they would come. I also invited Curtis and Ruth O'Neill, Eli and his wife, and Lila Mae Walker. I invited Pastor Jeremiah Stone from the church. I hired 2 women from the parish to help me cook. We made barbecue, rice, beans, homemade cornbread, and iced tea. I set up a long table on the front porch with a white tablecloth Alara kept for special occasions. The day of the dinner was a Saturday in October, exactly 1 year after the court sentencing. The evening was cool and beautiful, with an orange sky that makes you grateful to be alive. People started arriving around 6 o'clock. Jamal came first with his family. Shayla arrived shortly after. She hugged me, crying. It had been more than a year since I last saw her. The children ran around the yard, happy to be together. Marcus was the last to arrive. He came alone. His wife hadn't returned to him yet, though he told me they were talking, trying to work things out. Marcus was wearing clean clothes. He had bathed and shaved, but the changes in him were still visible. The tan skin, the calluses on his hands, the way he walked, more humble, less proud. When Marcus entered the yard, everyone fell silent. Jamal and Shayla looked at him. They hadn't spoken to him the entire time. The neighbors also looked at him. Marcus walked slowly to where I was standing on the porch. He stopped in front of me. We looked each other in the eyes. Then I opened my arms, and he came closer. I hugged him. I hugged him hard, harder than I had in years. I felt his body tremble as he started to cry against my shoulder. I cried too. After a moment, we murmurated. Marcus went to greet his siblings. Jamal hugged him. Shayla did too. The 3 of them crying together. Then Marcus went to each of the neighbors, Curtis, Eli, Lila Mae. He apologized again to each one. He thanked them for allowing him to work for them, for teaching him what he had forgotten. Each one forgave him and hugged him. We all sat down at the table. Pastor Stone blessed the food, giving thanks to God for bringing us together, for justice, for forgiveness, and for family. We started eating. The food was delicious. The women I hired had done an excellent job. There was conversation, laughter, the children making noise like children do. When we finished eating, I stood up from my chair. Everyone quieted down and looked at me. I cleared my throat. I felt nervous. Even though it was my own house, my own family, I began to speak. I told them I had gathered them for an important reason, that exactly 1 year ago, a judge declared that Marcus had committed fraud against me and against our neighbors, that Marcus had lost everything and had fallen very low. But I told them I had given him a condition to be allowed back into the family. A year of unpaid work, service, and humility. I told them Marcus had complied, that he had worked 12 full months, every day, without complaint, without missing a day, that he had repaid with his labor what he had taken with his deception, and that the neighbors could testify that Marcus had done good, honest work. I looked at Marcus, who was sitting with his head bowed, his hands on the table. I told him that family is not just blood, that family is respect, love, loyalty, and trust. I told him that when he robbed me, when he put me in the chicken coop, when he humiliated me, he had lost the right to call himself my son. He had broken the bonds that are more important than blood. But I also told him that he had worked to rebuild those bonds, that with every day of hard work, with every moment of humility, with every act of service, he had been repairing what he had broken. And I told him that now, after a year, after seeing him change, after seeing him become a good man again, I was ready to say something. I walked over to where Marcus was sitting. I put my hand on his shoulder and spoke in a loud voice so everyone could hear. I told him that tonight, at this table, in front of his family, and the people he had harmed and who had forgiven him, I once again recognized him as my son. That he was no longer just Marcus Jefferson, the man who made mistakes. Now he was once again my son, Marcus, part of this family, part of my life. Marcus looked up, his eyes filled with tears. He got up from his chair and hugged me. Everyone at the table applauded. Some were crying. Jamal and Shayla also stood up and hugged both of us. It was a moment I will never forget as long as I live. After that, the dinner continued, but with a different atmosphere, lighter and happier. We told stories, we laughed, the children played and made noise like children do. Pastor Stone told jokes that made us all laugh. Curtis raised a toast to family, to forgiveness, and to new beginnings. We stayed at that table until it was completely dark, until we had to turn on the porch lights, until the children started falling asleep in their chairs. That night, when everyone had gone, Marcus and I stayed alone on the porch. We sat in our chairs, just like we had 6 months before. Marcus told me he wanted me to know something. He said he had found a job, a simple job as a salesman, at a seed and fertilizer store in Baton Rouge. It didn't pay much, but it was honest. He said he was slowly paying off his debts, that his wife had agreed to give him another chance, and that the children would soon be moving back in with him. He also told me he had spoken with a lawyer about the criminal case that was still pending. His new lawyer explained that because he had returned everything, had worked to compensate, and the victims had forgiven him, he would likely receive a lighter sentence, perhaps community service instead of jail time. He said he would accept whatever the judge decided, that he wasn't going to fight it anymore, and that he deserved whatever punishment they gave him. I nodded my head. I told him I was happy to hear all that I was proud of him. Not the man he had been 2 years ago, but the man he was becoming now. I told him the road would still be difficult for a while, that rebuilding a life wasn't easy, but now I knew he had the strength to do it. Marcus thanked me. He thanked me for not abandoning him, for giving him a second chance, for teaching him the most important lesson of his life. He said he would never forget those 12 months, that he would never forget what he learned working the land again. And I told him something I needed to tell him. I told him that I had learned something in all of this too. I had learned that justice is important, that you have to fight for it, that you must not let anyone take your dignity without defending yourself. But I had also learned that forgiveness is possible, that people can change if they truly want to, if they are willing to do the hard work of transformation. My friends who are listening, I'm almost finished with this story. I want you to take something away from it. I don't want you to pity me, or hate Marcus, or think we are special. We are ordinary people who went through something difficult and came out on the other side. What I want you to remember is this: you can't be robbed of your dignity unless you hand it over. Marcus took my house and my land, and he put me in a chicken coop like an animal. But he couldn't take my dignity because I never gave it to him. I stood tall, I sought justice, and I fought. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.